Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or even good tomorrow, depending on where you are, wherever you are around this world. We're looking forward to this podcast today and hope to leave you inspired.
I want to tell you, folks, I remember this radio personality from my younger days, and we had no TV at our home, but of course in those days things like computers and cell phones and iPads and so forth hadn't even been thought of. And televisions were rare. We didn't have one in our home, nor did my grandmother, who we usually would have stuff like that. So reading and radio were my favorite time passers, and I listened to all the old radio shows, the country music with the original Hank Williams and others, and of course Mr. Paul Harvey. And my reading everything I could get my hands on and Paul Harvey were my way of escaping where we were in life. And he told such wonderful stories with such flair and style and stories of people around the world. And I continued listening to him for years into my adulthood. And I want to thank our dear friends Dick and Mary Reed for an excellent copy of his book that they sent most recently. Paul Harvey Arant was his last name, who he dropped it later on, but he was born September 4th, 1918 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. 25 years later, he dropped that surname for professional reasons as his star began to rise in the world of radio. Tragedy struck early in his life as 3-year-old Paul lost his father while he was in the line of duty as a Tulsa policeman when a burglar's bullet put the family in desperate financial straits. And to keep collectors at bay, Paul's mother turned space into their home, making little small apartments to rent out to renters. And his childhood consisted of abject poverty, with his mother struggling to raise him. But he had a passion, and he built his own radio set as a kid, and the magic and the medium of radio remained a lifelong passion. Paul Harvey's voice was the golden goose that kept on giving. It became a highly tuned instrument powered by crystal clear Midwestern accent. With the passion of an evangelist, his enduring voice resonated the thrill of new products in his testimony-styled commercials. As he put the art in articulation, his listeners followed the rise and the fall of every tonal inflection. He captured the ears of radio listeners for decades with his down-home accent and his traditional American values. Paul, with his wife Lynn, his angel, he called her, blew into the windy city of Chicago in the early 1950s and eventually spoke daily to 24 million people on over 1,300 radio stations. Lynn worked diligently by his side as his producer and co-writer during their 67 years of marriage. The Chicago elites of the left-leaning sort referred to Paul Harvey's on-air style as homespun, old-fashioned musing, out of touch, even as right-wing. His incredible success only proved who the out-of-touch ones really were. Paul Harvey knew his audience and what they wanted, like a mama bear knows her cubs. The listeners to the rest of the story and Paul Harvey news and comments were more reliable than Old Faithful in Yellowstone Park. At the zenith of his popularity and prosperity, a restlessness within his spirit nudged him towards the God of his upbringing. He tells the story of driving up a mountain road on a Sunday morning to visit a little country church in a hilltop clearing. He said in that eloquent style of his, "The little steeple pierced an azure sky, and white clapboard siding reflected the morning sun." As he settled into the wooden folding chair amid a dozen or so worshipers, the country preacher announced that he would be preaching on being baptized in the Bible way. The simple eloquence of the country preacher made Harvey twist in his chair as he realized that he had never done what the Lord Jesus commands all new believers to do. He realized that he had never taken that step of obedience in following Jesus in believers' baptism. As the sermon drew to a close and as the pianist plunked out a familiar hymn, the country preacher's closing invitation to the small gathering was to yield themselves daily, totally to Christ. Paul Harvey found himself stepping into the aisle and walking forward with a desire to be fully obedient to Christ. A new joy invaded the daily routine of deadlines and headlines in Harvey's world, and with one of the most powerful microphones in the free world before him each day, his humbling step of public baptism seemed to free him up to be more vocal about his Christian faith. He considered himself to be a blessed man. He had found a wife with whom he could live and work with on an around-the-clock basis. She was the behind-the-scenes brains of their communications conglomerate that included radio, newspaper, commercials, and a stint in television. Leukemia took his angel away in May of 2008. He soon followed at the age of 90, February 28, 2009, and radio has never been the same. Paul Harvey was known for catchphrases to be used at the beginning of his programs, such as, "Hello, Americans, this is Paul Harvey. Stand by for news." He always ended, "Paul Harvey, good day." This is my favorite story of his, and his delivery of it is far more eloquent than anybody else could do for it. And it's from 1965. That's 5 decades ago. It starts out like this. If I were the prince of darkness, I would want to engulf the whole world in darkness. I'd have 1/3 of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I would not be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree, thee. So I would set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first, and I would begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you, as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince the children that man created God instead of the other way around. I'd confide that what's bad is good and what's good is square. And as the old, I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which are in Washington. Then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make literature exciting so that everything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellect, but neglect to discipline emotions. I'd tell teachers to let those students run wild, and before you knew it, you'd have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing and judges promoting pornography. Soon I would evict God from the courthouse and the schoolhouse, and from the halls of Congress. In his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I'd lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and the church money. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give it to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. What'll you bet I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich? I'd convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, and that what you see on television is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public and lure you into bed and give you diseases for which there are no cures. In other words, if I was the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's been doing. If I were the devil. Paul Harvey always ended every broadcast with, "Paul Harvey, good day." And after every story, he would close it with, "And now you know the rest of the story." Folks, would you conclude from this that Paul Harvey was a prophet? Because so much of what he said has most certainly come to pass. There is much of the devil throughout the world: poverty, diseases, greed, the rich making themselves richer, and the poor poorer.
If I Were the Devil by Mr. Paul Harvey. This is 2023 while I'm recording this story. Folks, it has gotten much worse than Paul Harvey ever imagined way back in 1965, which is to be expected, as the things that he saw have come to pass. They're just compounding now, and the devil is dancing with glee as he turns the world into bitter despair and darkness. He seemingly, though, has overlooked one small detail. God is still alive and well in his people, and we will fight the devil until the glorious end. Don't ever stop fighting against the evil that is rearing its ugly head throughout the world. Fight back now. God bless you. Make it an awesome day. I want to thank you for tuning in today, and I'll be seeing you in the winner's circle. God bless, and make it an awesome day. J.P. Smith, good day.